Hi folks, welcome to Kev's Shed. In my last video I made a table just using pallet wood and epoxy, and that technique has intrigued me as a way to use all kind of wasteful wood. Now I've got this whole load of mill ends, firewood actually, it's normally for burning, and you can see every piece is being docked off because it's got a floor of some kind on it. And as I always say, features not flaws. And I'm just wondering if I can use that same technique to build up a tabletop. My wife actually wants me to build one for an outdoor setting that she's got, and I'm intrigued to see whether or not this will work as well. So I'm going to lay it out and then try and let the epoxy fall in between the different pieces of wood. I might stagger it like bricks and see if that's good enough. Again, might work, might not. This is the table that she wants to put a hard top on. It's normally an outdoor table or an outdoor setting, but because we're in a covered area, she'd like to have a hard top on it. So I'll make that the project then. My trailer load of mill ends. There's usually a good surface on each one. Well, maybe not always, but it shouldn't matter for this technique. Okay, so what I've done is I've got this sheet of plywood. I've got it all nice and level, and I've got a piece of wood with a straight edge on it, and I'm going to line that up. And then I think I'm going to use some cling wrap and put that all over the plywood so that the epoxy doesn't stick to the plywood. And then the plan is that I'm going to put the epoxy maybe on the edges just to make sure that it gets in between, and literally I'm going to pour it over the top and let it run down inside them, and then I'm just going to push them together. I'm not sure if I'm even going to bother to clamp them. The idea is that it's kind of like joining wood together, like those river type boards and things that people do. Only instead of a big river, I'm going to have them fairly close. Now, the idea of that is that I don't have to dress any of the timber. All right, the epoxy is going to do the filling, and then I'm going to plane the whole lot. Maybe using the power carver with the turbo plane, which is perfect for this sort of job. What I'll do is I'm just putting it on the edge just to make sure that there's some in between, but then I'm going to pour it on over the top of it afterwards anyway, so that it runs into all of the crevices. I'm just filling any spots where it's soaked down and through. I was concentrating more on the side grain because I figure that the brick shape and the side grain is probably the strongest, but the end grain I'm just trying to fill the gaps. So I might let this set. First lot's already sort of gelling. I'll let this set, and then it won't run out if I put in another lot. So I've only got 1 litre of resin there, and it seems to be plenty. Okay, so now that all the epoxy is nice and hard, and so I'm going to proceed to plane it down. I'm going to use the Arbortech, they call it the power unit, and look, this product isn't available in the US just yet. And it will be. They've been waiting on the right motor for the United States, but we hope to get it there soon. notwithstanding the current problems with getting things around the world. But it will be there soon. And what this allows me to do is use the turbo plane, and I can adjust the height and just take off all the high spots and then get it down nice and level. And then I can put the sanding disc and use quite an aggressive sanding disc if I like, and then I can sand it with no dust, and it's automatically leveling too, because you can adjust it so that you're just taking off the high spots first and then you get it really nice and flat. So this will be a great tool just to do this. Probably the only tool I need apart from the pieces of wood and the epoxy. The trick is to not go too aggressively with the power unit and the planer too soon. So you'll see that some spots I've taken off quite a bit of material, and here I haven't, and that's because that's low and that's high. And the idea is you take off all the high spots first, and then just check it, and you'll find that you can build it really nice and level. So just, you know, when you set it, you want to turn it so that it's cutting but flat, and then take off all the high spots, and then later you can go a little bit more aggressive. Fortunately, somebody helping me misunderstood which way the wood goes when we were putting it together, and so I've got a rather large feature here that I need to fill. When you do this, the idea is this would normally be the other way up, and the idea is that the resin comes down and fills all of the gaps. So the best face of the wood should be on the underside when you're doing this. So if I fill that, the rest of it should come up okay. Look, I don't normally talk about Arbortech tools at Kev's Shed. This video channel I came up with to promote just being creative and making things simply with the fewest tools as possible. Most of you, I'm sure, already know that I'm the CEO of Arbortech and that I designed most of our tools, and that that the tools that I mostly use are in fact Arbortech tools. But I do want to talk about this one because it did really help me a lot, and I think people should know about this particular tool. It's called the Power Carver. It's a unit that comes with various attachments for it. It's got variable speed, and you can use it with the turbo plane and the sander. And the results are just quite stunning, and I mean, I'm still learning about it myself, but what really impressed me is just how beautifully level I was able to do quite a big area. And you can see here, and I'll bring you in close so you can see it's absolutely perfectly square and flat. And I didn't really try hard to do that. I really was just working evenly in a figure-8 pattern. I started with the turbo plane and removed the bulk of the material to get down to the wood. Then I used the sanding discs, and there's a few tricks to it. Mainly, you'll notice it start to take off the high spots first, and you keep working those high spots until they start to dominate. If you concentrate on the spots where you're not reaching, then you'll get all uneven. So you basically keep widening the areas that are going nice and flat until it all joins up. And that's all I did. But with a sander, I just worked in a figure-8 pattern and just evenly over the entire piece. So there it is, beautifully square, beautifully flat. Now, this isn't fine woodworking. What I've done here is I've got pieces of wood from my firewood heat. They're not dressed, they're not straight, their edges, they're not even docked off, very square. And I've just used epoxy to join it all together. Not epoxy, a resin, fiberglass resin. You can use epoxy and maybe some other materials. I did notice that if I went too aggressively with the turbo plane, that it started to chip some of the resin. but if I did it nice and fine and moved slowly over it, then it cut it nice and clean. And then, of course, I used the sanding discs. It's come up amazingly well, I think. Okay, well, I'm about to cut this down to size now, and Christine's told me that she wants it to be more like a tray, not a tabletop, and that she wants it to sit on top of that table with about 1 inch around in from the edge of the table, so it sits more like a tray. So I just thought I'd tell you that before I cut it, so that you realise that I didn't accidentally make it too small. So I'm going to cut it down to that size. This wood is called jarrah. It's a local indigenous species which is just about logged out now. It's quite a shame the way it's being treated. I mean, even now they burn it as firewood, and the local forest department here is called CALM, stands for Conservation and Land Management, which is totally ironic because it's been totally exploited. Most of the jarrah that came out of Western Australia was used for sleepers under British railroads in Africa and under the streets of London. Totally wasted, and it's ironic that the organisation is called CALM. You know, we're all supposed to stay calm while they completely decimated our forests. Anyhow, this is wood that ordinarily would be burned, and we've now turned it into something, I think, of some beauty. So here is the finished article. I'll just hold it up for you so you can see. It's, as I mentioned, it's not fine woodwork. What I've done is I've used rough blocks of wood, and it's all joined just by the resin, and it's all been filled by the resin, so it didn't require any real joinery or anything like that. I mentioned before that, you know, the whole objective of this sort of work is that you can do it with very few tools. I've literally used the epoxy, or the resin, of course, and nearly everything was done with a sander. It's been great having the Arbortech power carver with the sanding unit, but really this could be done with any sander at all. So really all you're doing is you're putting wood together with a resin or epoxy, and you're just letting that set, and then you're just sanding the surface. You may have to plane it if you've got very uneven surfaces, but because this firewood is all mill ends, it's already nice and dry, and it was all roughly the same size, so it wasn't very much sanding at all. So there it is. I'll take it, put it in place, and we can see what it looks like. You see where it's been filled, but with the resin. So even though it was quite, you know, wide gaps, the resin has just gone through and filled all of the gaps, and that's perfectly fine. So now there's a really big gap there. It's all filled and nice and smooth. It's come up, I think, really well. So here it is on the outdoor table. So even though we're outdoors, we're indoors really, so it's perfectly fine. I just put an oil coating on it, and I think it's come up really good. So my wife was actually asking me to do herringbone pattern. I said, get a carpenter. So that's good use of the my firewood, I think.